Lab number 234. In this lab, we will focus on our login page. We'll implement the login functionality using MobileFirst Platform adapter-based authentication concept. So basically, let's start with opening the Chrome browser and navigating to our MobileFirst Platform Getting Started page for version 7.1, and from there to All Tutorials. We are now interested in a tutorial for authentication. Adapter-based authentication in hybrid applications. If you don't understand how all that thing works, you should first read, of course, the adapter-based authentication concept first, and then specifically this article. Also, you may watch the video, which is almost 1 hour long, even 2 videos to be pretty honest, about authentication in our MobileFirst platform. Open authentication and the classic framework that was recorded by Anton Alexandrov. They are available on mfp.help, so feel free to educate yourself there. So we'll start right from here. The idea is basically that we will grab username and the password and we will send them to a server for validation, and on server side we will just in adapter check if they are correct or not. The default example from getting started actually working in a way that when authentication is needed, when you're trying to access the resource that is protected, basically it shows you a specific div with the form in which you're submitting the username and the password, and if the authentication is not needed, this div is not shown. So we'll have a bit different logic because we have this login page and we want every user to pass the login actually. So we won't have this divs, hides, show, and so on. We will just, after clicking on login button, call actually submit the adapter authentication with invocation data to which we will pass the username and the password. We will start our work with the adapter that needs to be created. So I will open the MobileFirst Platform example project that can be found on GitHub, and basically right now we will focus on adapter. So here on the GitHub you have a simple code for adapter. It's called auth adapter. And of course it has 2 files, the XML, which actually describes the adapter. Nothing really special, just default values for domain. It's not really important. And basically 2 procedures. So one is submit authentication, which will check authentication. And second, in this particular example, is get secret data. So as I said before, idea is that when you get into secret data, and you're trying to pass the security test and figuring out that you need to authenticate yourself, then basically you're trying to invoke the submit authentication to have the authenticated flag and go back to get the secret data. In our case, we won't have this second part, we just will have submit authentication, and if everything will be okay, if we'll got the flag that yeah, we are authenticated, then we will navigate to our main page and request resources from another adapter. Again, don't consider this as best practice, this is just example. So first of all, let's create the adapter. So we'll do it by navigating in our terminal window at the bottom of text editor. We'll navigate back to workspaces and to our Comrade server project, and which we will add adapter using the command mfp add adapter. So our adapter name will be named something like Comrade auth adapter. It will be HTTP adapter, and we don't need JSON store, we don't need USSD for now. So as you can see, we now have here an adapter. And 2 procedures. So basically, as I said, we don't need 2, we just need 1. And let's name it the same, like submit authentication, just like this. We don't need the filtered XSL file because, as you remember, this file is doing transformation from actually the XML answer to the JSON, but we don't need any transformation, we don't need any logic here. And our JS file, so adapter JS file. Actually, we can remove everything that is here and go back to GitHub to check the JS file here. So basically we have several functions here. The main one, the procedure actually that we will be calling submit authentication, will receive the username and the password as the input parameters, and we'll check if the username is user and the password is password. So pretty simple check. Then basically it will say that, yeah, we have this user identity, we authenticate it, and we will return authentication required false. If it's not valid, so if the username will be different, we will return invalid login credentials. We'll also have basically a function on logout that will be called by default when we are trying to log out, and we will also have on authentication required, which will check basically if there is any error message, and if it is, it will construct the authentication required to true and error message and return this per request. So basically we can just take all of that, copy and paste in our JS file, just like this. Get secret data is not needed. Basically, we don't need any changes here. Let's try with the username, user, and the passwords. That's all that we need to do with adapter. But we also need to configure on the server-side project our authentication config file. Let's go back to our browser and navigate to the root folder of this project, then inside server conf authentication config XML. So the idea is that we need to define a security test. It will be a custom one, as we described here. This security test will actually launch this authentication realm, which is called auth realm. And here we have a login module with login function. As you can see, it's on auth required and on logout function. So two functions that exist in our adapter. And then at the end we also need to define the login module, which will be just a standard non-validation login module. So we can start with copying a custom security test under security tests. Then we need to copy the realm. And the login module, just like this. So now we can go back to our terminal and do mfp push. That will actually push the changes, including the new adapter that was created and changes in authentication config to a server side, and we will be able to use it later on inside our app. Okay, so the changes are pushed, and we can actually close this authentication config. We can navigate back in terminal to our Comrade project instead of Comrade server, just like this. And now it's time to work on the client-side logic. So we will be working, of course, with the first of all with the login screen. And here you remember that we had two input fields for username and the password. So first of all, using Angular, we will assign, we will create the binding between the value that will be entered and the variable using ng model. So let's assign it to username, and the same here in the password variable, something like password. Nothing really special here. So as you remember, when we click on this button, on login button, we actually calling the do login function. Let's pass these two variables there, username and the password, so we can operate with them inside. And let's go to our controller. So right now on do login we are not checking anything, and we need to add that logic. Again, we are not need to reinvent the bicycle. We'll use the standard example. For that we will go back to our browser, to the GitHub project, and navigate to apps, hybrid adapter out, common, JS, and authentication realm challenge processor. So this is the demo code that you can also find on this article, well explained what is doing what and so on. I won't be going into details. You can read that and you can also watch the video, but just the basic things. So first of all, we need to create the challenge handler. And basically, on the moment when we will submit the adapter authentication, in return, there will be a handle challenge called together with is custom response that will actually notify the server about successful authentication. So when the server will authorize user saying, yeah, this is authenticate user, sorry, yeah, this is the valid user, and return the result that authentication required is false, we'll submit success back to a server confirming that, yeah, we accepted this and user now authenticated. We continue working, and basically after that, after this successful challenge completion, we will need to navigate. So what we will be doing, we will be just copying all that code from here. Let's start firstly with this part before the button. So I will comment that for now. So we don't need any changes in is custom response and handle challenge. They will be called after server will respond something, but we need to make a bit of changes inside the logic of showing those divs and having those divs. So actually we don't need those divs. Let's first of all do some kind of login. Something like just the value of this authentication required. And the same here. So basically, authentication required true means that we were unsuccessful in our try to authenticate. Probably we'll get the error message, something like, hey, there is an error, invalid credentials, or unknown error, or whatever. In case authentication required will return false, this means that it was successful and we need to submit success back to server that we accepted it. And basically after this moment we can do the navigation, so we can perform this scope get comrades and go to main page. Let's also display the error message for now in the console here. Something like authentication error, and then this response JSON error message that we'll get in return. And now let's go back to browser and work on the second part. So actually we have two buttons here in example. One is cancel button, something like logout a bit. Second one is submit button. So actually this code is needed for us to perform the authentication. So let's copy it and paste again inside our do login. So username and the passwords actually already defined, because as you remember on do login in index.html we pass the username and the password as the input variables. So here we can right away work with them. And we don't need to declare them. Invocation data needs to be filled with the proper values. In our case, the adapter name will be comrade auth adapter. A procedure name will be the same because we actually named it the same way. And the parameters will be the same, so username and the password. And this challenge handler submit adapter authentication actually will pass these parameters to a server for further validation. And after that, we will end up in handle challenge and its customer response. So now let's work a bit on the handling the error. As you remember, I typed it inside the console, something like auth error, but we also need to display the error to our user, otherwise he won't notice that something bad has just happened. So let's create the variable something like display error. That will be a Boolean variable, so either true, either false. In our case, right now it will be true. And we need it to define it also outside of our function, somewhere on the top. By default it will be false, of course. And next thing, let's also add something like display message, and assign the value of that message to our error message that we got in response. And apply changes to scope. Just like that. Now we need to add that in index.html. So let's create basically a simple div. Let's make this text in red using assertive class. And basically here we will pass the display message that will contain our error. And this one will be shown only in case we actually got the error. So we will need to type something like ng-show, and it will be displayed only if display error will be true. Otherwise this div will be hidden and we won't be able to see this display message. Next step is actually to do the logout functionality, because after we logged in we also need to have a chance somehow to log out before actual session will die or something like that. So let's define some kind of button inside our main page. For that, let's go back to the browser and navigate to Ionic framework. We need a docs page, and we'll do a logout button in footer of this page. So for that, let's navigate to CSS footer and copy the code from here. We'll pass it inside the main page just before closing of IonView. Just here, we don't need the first button. I will add a title later. And our button will be actually a logout button. So let's type here something like logout. And let's make it positive. Something like that. Now we need an action. We will do it using the Angular ng-click, and we will call something like do logout function. So this do logout needs to be defined. So let's make it somewhere nearby the do login. So what we need to do here, first of all, we need to log out. So we'll do it using worklights clients logout function, and we need to pass the parameter of the realm from which we want to do that. So in our case, it's auth realm. We also need to clear the username, password, and the error message in case it was shown. So for that, let's do the following. Let's actually assign them to empty values, something like username. The same for password. The same for comrades, because we don't want our data to be saved when we are logged out. And we also need to navigate to state, back to actual login state. And of course, display error needs to be set to false. But if we think about it logically, this needs to be set up not on logout, but on login. So in case we successfully logged in and there were previously the errors, we need to clean them by setting the display error to false. So our logout function completed, and the last thing that we need to change is actually app.js. Because since the latest versions of Ionic framework, they implemented the caching of our views, so we need to disable that. Otherwise, we won't be able to see the changes that we are doing in scope on the page when we are going back, because it will be cached, and actually the page will be looking like old one. So we'll do it using the cache false for all three states, something like that. Now it's time to take a look on what we actually developed. So we'll do it using the browser and the command mfp preview. This will do builds and of course deploy, and we will be able to select whether we want the simple browser rendering or mobile browser simulator. Right now we will focus on the simple browser. So here we go, our page. Let's open the element inspection. Let's put it back inside the developer tools in a browser. I will select something like Nexus 4 for testing view, like this. So we connected to server. Actually, client init was successful. Let's go to our sources, open here the controller.js, add some breakpoints and test how all that stuff working. So first of all, when we're clicking on do login, the first thing that is interested for us is actually submitting the data about username and the password to a server side. Then we also need the handle challenge breakpoint and this custom response breakpoint to see if there were called and what results do we have. And last thing is we want to see actually the end result. So in case we will have the error message, we would like to see the details somewhere here about this error message. And now basically let's test. I will type the username, which is not wrong, and of course the same password, and we'll see what's happened. So we got basically the first breakpoint. It won't execute, it's just going through. Going to a second, it won't execute, just going through. Now it's time to submit the data. As you can see, it took our password and the username. put it inside invocation data together with the adapter name, procedure name, and so on. Now it's time to call a server. Yep, and now we got into the handle challenge. We are seeing that we are inside application error message, and we got it in the console, authentication required true. And the application error invalids login credentials. So now it's time to actually display the message. We apply changes to scope. Yeah, we see the error message, invalid login credentials. Something like that. So now let's try a second time with the valid username and the password. Something like user and the password as we defined. So yeah, as you can see, now we successfully went through. Basically, we should see inside the information that's we kind of authenticated, and we managed to get a comrade list, and we managed to navigate. So now we can actually work with these details and so on, and we also need to check the logout. So on logout, navigate back, but it's not happening. Let's check why. Yeah, of course, because I misspelled, it should be state instead of scope. So let's go back to controller, and instead of scope go, of course, we need to do a state go because we're changing the state, not the scope. And let's try again with mfp preview. We need to select the browser. I don't need breakpoints anymore, so I will remove them from the code. And let's also make a clear test. I will clear the local storage. So now we have kind of ideal like we had it the first time. Let's try with the wrong username and the password. Invalid login credentials, excellent. Let's try with the correct one. So we got insights, now logout button, and we went back. Username and password were cleared, but our invalid login credentials are still shown. So let's fix that. So let's check. Basically another typo, it should be under the scope, of course. Display error to true. And now we save that. Let's try again with mfp preview. So here we go. Wrong username and password, and credentials, excellent, and the correct one. Okay, we are inside, logout, yeah. So now it's working. Basically, on this step, we have a working login module that doing the authentication using adapter-based concept from MobileFirst Platform. And on this specific thing, we are finishing our lab. So our lab number 234 is finished, and we will continue development of this common application in next labs. Thank you.